I never believed marriages ended all at once. I believed they unraveled slowly, thread by invisible thread, until one day you realized you were holding something hollow. For 12 years, I told myself that wasn't happening to me. I told myself that love, real love, survived silence, survived distance, survived the way my husband stopped looking at me like I was the center of his world and started looking at me like furniture he'd grown used to. I told myself that saving a marriage meant patience. What I didn't know back then was that patience can become a blindfold if you wear it too long. The night everything changed, it was raining in that soft, persistent way that makes the world feel smaller, quieter, like secrets travel better in the dark. I was alone in the house, again. My husband had texted earlier, something vague about working late, something I no longer questioned out loud. I was in the kitchen, standing barefoot on cold tile, staring at a mug of tea I hadn't touched, when I heard the knock. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was hesitant. Like whoever stood on the other side of my door wasn't sure they should be there. When I opened it, I saw her. She was younger than me. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed immediately. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Light jacket soaked at the shoulders, mascara slightly smudged, eyes wide and glossy with something between fear and exhaustion. She looked at me the way people look at someone they already know, even if they've never met them before. And the strangest part? She looked relieved. "I'm so sorry," she said before I could speak. Her voice trembled. I think I need help. I should have closed the door. I should have asked who she was, what she wanted, why she was standing in front of my house at night like she belonged there. But something about her, the way her hands shook, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, triggered a reflex in me that I didn't even know I still had. Compassion. That old version of me who believed helping someone was always the right thing. So I stepped aside and let her in. She sat at my kitchen table, clutching a paper cup of tea like it was the only solid thing in her world. I noticed the small details then, the faint indentation on her ring finger where a ring used to be, the way she flinched every time a car passed outside, the fact that she kept thanking me for things that didn't need gratitude. She told me her name was Lena. She told me she'd just left a relationship that was complicated. She told me she didn't have anywhere else to go. What she didn't tell me, not yet, was how deeply her life was already entangled with mine. I listened. I nodded. I offered words I'd offered to myself for years. Sometimes love gets messy. Sometimes people hurt us without meaning to. Sometimes staying feels harder than leaving. As I spoke, I felt oddly strong, like I was finally useful at something again. Like maybe helping this broken stranger was proof that I wasn't as invisible as my marriage had made me feel. At one point, she looked up at me and said, "You seem like someone who understands loyalty." That sentence landed heavier than it should have. She stayed for over an hour. When she finally left, the rain had slowed, and the house felt different, charged, unsettled, like a window had been opened somewhere I couldn't see. I cleaned the extra mug, wiped the table, and told myself that was the end of it. Just a sad woman passing through my life for one strange evening. But as I turned off the kitchen light, my phone buzzed. A message from my husband. Running even later than expected. "Don't wait up." I stared at the screen, then at the front door, then back at the screen again. A quiet, unfamiliar thought crept into my mind, uninvited and sharp. What if I just invited the wrong woman into my home, and my marriage? If this story is already pulling you in, take a second to hit like. It helps more than you think. And trust me, this is only the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself it was the caffeine from the tea, the rain tapping too insistently against the windows, the emptiness of the bed beside me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something had shifted. Something small, almost invisible, but heavy enough to sit on my chest and make breathing feel deliberate. The next morning, my husband came home quietly, like a guest trying not to wake the house. I heard him before I saw him, the familiar sound of keys placed too carefully on the counter, shoes lined up instead of kicked off. He kissed my cheek while I pretended to be asleep, his lips lingering half a second longer than usual. Guilt has weight. You can feel it if you've been married long enough. Over breakfast, we talked about nothing. Weather. Traffic. A coworker he'd mentioned before but never by name. I studied him the way you study a photograph after someone points out a hidden detail, searching for signs I might have missed for years. He looked tired. Distracted. Kind. Still handsome in that way that had once made me feel chosen. "You were up late?" he asked, stirring his coffee. "Couldn't sleep," I said. It wasn't a lie. He nodded, like he understood. Like we were both silently agreeing not to ask questions we were afraid of answering. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from an unknown number. "Thank you again for last night. I don't know what I would have done without you." My fingers hovered over the screen. I didn't save her number. I hadn't expected to hear from her again. And yet, some part of me felt responsible. Like once you open your door to someone's pain, you don't get to pretend it's not yours anymore. I replied. "You're welcome. I hope you're okay." Her response came almost immediately. "Can I ask you something personal?" I should have said no. I should have protected the fragile piece of my life the way I'd learned to protect my marriage, by avoiding sharp edges. Instead, I typed, "Sure." There was a pause. Long enough for me to regret it. "How long have you been married?" The question hit me harder than it should have. I stared at it, suddenly aware of how strange this conversation was becoming. I told her the truth. 12 years. Another pause. "Do you ever feel like you don't really know the person you're married to anymore?" My throat tightened. Because that question wasn't personal, it was precise. It sliced straight through years of denial and landed exactly where I kept my doubts buried. "Sometimes," I wrote. When she replied, it wasn't a question this time. It was a statement. "I think the man I was seeing is married." I remember sitting down slowly, like my body understood the danger before my mind did. Married men exist everywhere. This didn't mean anything. It didn't mean my husband. But the image of her standing on my doorstep, rain-soaked and trembling, replayed in my mind with new clarity. The relief in her eyes. The way she'd looked around my house like it was familiar. I asked her if she knew for sure. "Not completely," she said. "He never talks about his home life. But he disappears at night. On weekends. He says he's busy." Busy. The word echoed. I typed and erased half a dozen responses before settling on something safe. "That must be really hard." She sent a crying emoji. Then another message. "You remind me of her." My heart skipped. "Her who?" I asked. "His wife," she said. "The way you talk. The way you listen. I don't know why, but when I met you, I felt like I already knew you." The room felt too quiet. I thought about my husband's careful movements that morning. The way he'd kissed my cheek. The way he'd never once said another woman's name in front of me, not in anger, not in frustration, not even by accident. That night, when he fell asleep beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every unexplained absence, every vague excuse, every moment I'd chosen trust over curiosity. Helping her had felt like the right thing to do. But now I was starting to understand something terrifying. Sometimes the truth doesn't come to you screaming. Sometimes it knocks softly, and waits for you to invite it in. If you're feeling this tension build, go ahead and tap like, it tells me you're with me. And trust me, the next part changes everything. I didn't confront my husband. Not then. Not even when every instinct in my body screamed that I should. Instead, I did what I'd been doing for years: I observed. I paid attention in a way that felt almost forensic, like I was studying a stranger who happened to share my bed. Over the next few days, Lena and I talked more than I was comfortable admitting to myself. Short messages at first. Then longer ones. She never asked directly about my husband, and I never offered his name. We circled the truth like two people standing on opposite sides of a locked door, both pretending we didn't hear what was happening on the other side. She told me how she met him. A bookstore cafe. A spilled drink. A conversation that felt unexpectedly easy. He'd been charming but restrained, attentive but careful. A man who knew exactly how much of himself to reveal without giving anything away. I felt sick reading her words, not because they were unfamiliar, but because they weren't. That was him. She said he hated talking on the phone at night. Preferred texts. Said he traveled a lot for work. Said weekends were complicated. Each detail slid neatly into the empty spaces of my own life, filling them with meaning I hadn't wanted before. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found a receipt in his pants pocket. A cafe receipt. The name at the top made my hands go cold. The same bookstore cafe Lena had mentioned. I stood there for a long time, the fabric limp in my hands, the house silent around me. It still wasn't proof. Coincidences exist. Cities overlap. But my body knew before my mind caught up. That familiar heaviness returned, pressing down on my chest like a warning. That night, I asked him a question I'd never asked before. Do you believe people can love two people at the same time? He looked up from his phone, startled. Just for a second. But I saw it. I think people confuse attention with love, he said carefully. Why? I shrugged, forcing a smile. Just something I read. He went back to his phone. Conversation over. But his jaw stayed tight, and he didn't touch me when we went to bed. Later, Lena sent me a message that made my stomach drop. I think I've been to your house before. I read it 3 times. What do you mean? I typed, my pulse loud in my ears. I don't remember clearly, she said. But last night, when I was trying to sleep, I kept picturing your hallway. The photos on the wall. The way the light switches are placed. I've never been inside, but it feels familiar. I felt dizzy. Our hallway wasn't visible from the door. She couldn't have seen those details. Unless. I asked her if she'd ever been in his car. Yes, she replied. Many times. My hands trembled as I typed my next message. What does his car look like? She described it perfectly. The color. The small crack in the dashboard. The faint smell of peppermint gum. I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door, sliding down against it as if my legs could no longer support me. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was confirmation, assembling itself piece by piece in my mind. Still, the most painful realization wasn't that my husband was cheating. It was that he'd been doing it so carefully. So gently. Like he'd built 2 separate worlds and trained himself never to let them touch. Until me. Until I opened my door to the wrong woman and accidentally held up a mirror to my own life. If you're still here with me, take a second to subscribe. This story isn't just about betrayal, it's about what happens when the truth finally refuses to stay hidden. Once you know the truth, you start seeing it everywhere. In the way silence stretches between words. In the way someone avoids your eyes when the room gets too honest. I moved through my days like a ghost in my own life, smiling when required, responding when spoken to, all while carrying a secret that felt too heavy for my body. Lena wanted to meet again. The message sat on my screen for hours. Part of me wanted to disappear, block her number, pretend none of this had happened, crawl back into the familiar lie of my marriage. But another part of me, the part that had been ignored for years, was tired of pretending. Tired of being careful for someone who clearly hadn't been careful with me. We met at a quiet park just before sunset. She looked different in daylight. Less fragile. More real. When she saw me, her face fell into something like recognition and fear. "It's you," she whispered. I nodded. There was no point denying it. We sat on opposite ends of a bench, the space between us charged and uncomfortable. She spoke first, voice barely steady. "He told me he was separated." I believed her. I knew that particular lie, the way it sounds reasonable, temporary, almost responsible. I told her I didn't blame her. And I meant it. The anger I expected to feel toward her never came. Instead, there was grief. Shared grief. Two women holding different pieces of the same broken man. She asked me questions I didn't want to answer. How long we'd been married. Whether we were happy. Whether I still loved him. Each one cut deeper than the last. "I was trying to save my marriage," I said finally. "I thought if I was patient enough, kind enough, he'd come back to me." She laughed then. Not because it was funny, but because it was painfully familiar. "He said the same thing," she admitted. "That he was trying to figure out who he was. That he didn't want to hurt anyone." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass. I realized then that this wasn't just about infidelity. It was about control. About a man who curated truths depending on who was standing in front of him. When I got home, my husband was already there. Sitting at the table. Waiting. "You met her," he said. Not a question. I felt something in me harden. "Yes." He sighed, rubbing his temples like I was the problem he was too tired to solve. "I was going to tell you." I almost laughed. The audacity of that sentence nearly took my breath away. "When?" I asked quietly. "Soon." That word again. The same word he'd used for years. Soon. Later. Eventually. We argued in low voices, as if the walls might be listening. He admitted to the affair but minimized it, said it was a mistake, said it was confusing, said he never meant for it to go this far. I asked him why he'd brought her near our home. Why she recognized my hallway. He went silent. That silence told me more than his words ever could. Because some betrayals aren't accidents. They're rehearsed. If this moment hit you, tap like, you're helping this story reach people who need to hear it. And if you think you know where this is going, you don't. That night, after the argument ended the way all our arguments ended, unresolved, exhausted, suspended in silence, I lay awake and realized something terrifying. My husband wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing control over the version of me he thought he knew. He slept soundly beside me, as if confession were a sedative. As if honesty, once dragged out of him, absolved everything that came before it. I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the years I'd been shrinking myself to keep peace. All the questions I swallowed. All the instincts I overruled in the name of loyalty. By morning, something in me had shifted permanently. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't demand explanations. I moved through the house calmly, deliberately, like a woman preparing for a storm she could already feel in her bones. I made breakfast. I answered emails. I kissed him goodbye on the cheek when he left for work, and watched confusion flicker across his face. That afternoon, Lena texted me. "I think he's going to choose you." I stared at the message, stunned by how wrong it felt. "This isn't about choosing," I replied. "It never was." She didn't respond right away. When she did, Her message was longer. Messier. I don't know who I am without him, she wrote. Everything in my life bent around his availability. I understood that too well. Because at one point, mine had as well. We met one last time. Not to compare stories. Not to cry. But to tell the truth, the full truth, without editing it to protect him. We realized something chilling in that conversation. He hadn't just lied to us. He had studied us. He knew what each of us needed to hear. What kind of woman each of us was trying to be. With me, he played the role of the dependable husband who just needed patience. With her, he played the wounded man trapped in a loveless marriage. 2 performances. 1 actor. That evening, I asked him a question that finally broke the illusion. Did you ever plan to stop? He hesitated. That hesitation was my answer. For the first time in 12 years, I didn't negotiate my pain. I didn't ask him to choose me. I didn't offer counseling, forgiveness, or another chance wrapped in hope. I told him I was done. He looked genuinely shocked, not because he loved me so deeply, but because he never imagined I'd be the one to walk away. That was the moment I understood the most painful truth of all. The woman he underestimated was the woman who finally saw him clearly. If this part resonated with you, go ahead and subscribe. What comes next isn't just about leaving, it's about what happens after you reclaim yourself. People talk about leaving like it's a single moment. A slammed door. A suitcase by the stairs. Final words that echo dramatically in an empty house. But the truth is quieter than that. Leaving is a series of small, irreversible decisions that happen long before anyone notices. The morning after I told him I was done, the house felt unfamiliar. Not hostile. Just neutral. Like it no longer belonged to either of us. He tried to act normal, made coffee, asked if I wanted some, commented on the news playing softly in the background. The normalcy was almost insulting. As if 12 years could be folded away overnight, neat and manageable. I didn't respond. Silence, I learned, is unsettling to people who rely on your reactions to feel grounded. By noon, he asked if we could talk later. I said nothing. By evening, he asked if I was really serious. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and felt nothing sharp at all. No anger. No longing. Just clarity. Yes, I said. One word. Solid. Final. He didn't beg. Not really. He tried logic instead. Finances. History. The inconvenience of divorce. He spoke like a man losing a possession, not a partner. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Without my emotional labor, he had nothing compelling to offer. I slept in the guest room that night. Not because I was hurt, but because I needed space to hear myself think. And in that quiet, something unexpected surfaced. Relief. Not joy. Not freedom yet. Just relief that I no longer had to pretend confusion was normal. Lena texted me late. He hasn't called me all day. I read it without guilt. Without responsibility. He won't, I replied. Not for the reasons you think. She asked what I meant, but I didn't explain. Because some lessons can't be taught, they have to be lived. Over the next few days, the truth spread outward like ripples. Friends noticed. His family asked careful questions. Everyone wanted a clean story with a villain and a victim. But real life doesn't package pain that neatly. He moved out quietly. Took his clothes. His books. Left behind the things he'd never chosen, the photos I'd framed, the life I'd maintained, the version of himself he'd benefited from but never truly inhabited. On the first night alone in the house, I walked through every room slowly. I touched the walls. The furniture. The doorway where Lena had once stood, unknowingly holding the key to my awakening. I realized then that helping her hadn't destroyed my marriage. It had exposed it. And exposure, no matter how painful, is the beginning of truth. There's a moment that happens after someone leaves you, not physically, but emotionally, when you finally understand the loss. It doesn't arrive with tears or shouting. It arrives quietly, disguised as confusion. That moment came for him 2 weeks after he moved out. By then, the house had settled into a new rhythm. My rhythm. I woke up when my body told me to. I cooked meals I actually wanted to eat. I filled the silence with music again, not the background kind, but the kind that demands you feel something. I had stopped waiting for the sound of his car in the driveway. That alone felt revolutionary. He called on a Tuesday night. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Not to punish him, but because I was no longer conditioned to rush toward his needs. "I don't think you understand what you're doing," he said after a stiff hello. I smiled to myself. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. "I understand exactly what I'm doing," I replied. He told me he felt lost. That the apartment felt empty. That things with Lena had fallen apart. He said her name like it was a confession that should move me. Like jealousy was the response he expected. It didn't come. "What do you want?" I asked. There was a pause. A real one this time. No rehearsed answer. No emotional sleight of hand. "I want my life back," he said. And there it was. Not me. Not us. His life. I told him something I'd never said before, something I'd barely admitted to myself. "You didn't lose your life," I said calmly. "You lost access to mine." He didn't know how to respond to that. I could hear it in his breathing. In the way he shifted the phone in his hand. Men like him are fluent in persuasion, not accountability. Before hanging up, he asked if we could meet. Just to talk. I considered it. Not because I was tempted, but because I was curious. Curious to see him without the fog of hope distorting my vision. We met at a cafe halfway between our old house and his new apartment. Neutral ground. He looked tired. Smaller somehow. As if the confidence he'd borrowed from my presence had finally expired. He apologized. Not deeply. Not specifically. The way people apologize when they want relief, not repair. "I never thought you'd actually leave," he admitted. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. I stood up, thanked him for the honesty, and walked away before he could say anything else. I didn't look back. Not out of strength, but because I genuinely didn't need to. That night, I blocked his number. Not out of anger. Out of closure. If this part hit close to home, take a second to subscribe. The next chapter isn't about him anymore. It's about the woman who survived him. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments. In mornings that feel lighter for no obvious reason. In moments when you realize you haven't thought about him all day, and then realize that realization doesn't hurt. After I blocked his number, the world didn't collapse. It didn't even tremble. And that, more than anything, stunned me. For years, I'd been told, subtly, persistently, that I was the emotional center holding everything together. That without me, things would fall apart. But standing there in my kitchen, sunlight cutting across the counter where I once waited for him to come home, I understood the truth. I hadn't been holding the marriage together. I'd been holding him together. Without that burden, my body began to change first. I slept deeper. I ate when I was hungry, not when it was convenient. I caught my reflection in windows and mirrors and noticed something unfamiliar in my eyes. Presence. Lena reached out again. Not in crisis this time. Not unraveling. I started therapy, she wrote. I think I lost myself in him. I read her message slowly. Carefully. Then I replied with honesty, the kind I was only just learning to offer. So did I. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. Our connection had served its purpose. She had been the catalyst. I had been the collision. Neither of us were meant to stay in each other's lives forever. One evening, while sorting through old boxes, I found our wedding album. I expected it to hurt. To open something raw and bleeding. Instead, I felt something else. Grief, yes. But also compassion. For the woman I used to be. She had loved deeply. She had believed in repair. She had stayed longer than she should have, not because she was weak, but because she was loyal. And loyalty, I realized, is only a flaw when it's given to someone who doesn't deserve it. I didn't burn the photos. I didn't throw them away. I closed the album gently and placed it back in the box. Some chapters don't need to be destroyed to be finished. That night, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. No makeup. No performance. Just me. And for the first time in years, I didn't ask myself if I was enough. I knew I was. I thought the hardest truths had already been uncovered. The affair. The lies. The manipulation disguised as confusion. I thought closure was something you earned once you walked away and stayed gone. I was wrong. The final truth didn't come from him. It came from a place I never thought to question, the timeline. It happened accidentally. A quiet Sunday afternoon. I was organizing old emails, deleting years of digital clutter the way you clean out a closet when you're ready to breathe again. That's when I found it. An email from him. Dated 13 years ago. It was sent a month before our wedding. At first, I almost skipped it. Almost dismissed it as irrelevant, a relic from a life already archived. But something made me open it. A pull I've learned not to ignore. The subject line was simple, I'm scared. He wrote about doubts. About feeling trapped by expectations. About loving me, but not being sure if love was enough. He wrote that sometimes he imagined another life, one where he didn't have to be so careful, so responsible, so seen. And then he wrote the sentence that reframed everything. I don't think I'm meant to be faithful forever. I sat there, frozen. Not because it hurt, but because it explained. The affair wasn't a deviation. It was a continuation. He hadn't changed. He had simply aged into the man he'd always been trying to warn me about, quietly, indirectly, just enough to ease his conscience. All those years I spent trying to save the marriage. I had been trying to save a future he never fully committed to. I realized then that my heartbreak hadn't started with Lena. It had started long before I ever said, I do. The most painful betrayals aren't always sudden. Sometimes they're slow promises that were never meant to be kept. That night, I didn't feel anger. I felt release. Because the story finally made sense, beginning to end. No loose threads. No unanswered questions. I wasn't foolish for believing in him. He was dishonest for letting me. If this revelation hit you, take a moment to subscribe. The final part isn't about revenge the way you might expect, it's about the quiet power of knowing the truth, and choosing yourself anyway. Revenge, people think, is loud. It's dramatic. It demands witnesses. But the most powerful kind doesn't announce itself at all. It lives in indifference. Months passed. The divorce finalized quietly. No courtroom theatrics. No public unraveling. Just signatures, dates, and the soft thud of a chapter closing for good. I kept the house. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to choose something for myself without explaining why. He tried to resurface once more. An email. Neutral tone. Careful words. He said he hoped I was doing well. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking. I deleted it without replying. Because the woman reading that email was not the woman who once waited for explanations. I ran into Lena one last time by accident, at a grocery store. We exchanged a look that carried an entire history in a single second. She smiled. I smiled back. No bitterness. No alliance. Just mutual understanding. We were both free, in different ways, at different costs. That night, alone in my living room, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the quiet I'd once feared. And I realized something that settled deep in my bones. I didn't lose my marriage. I outgrew the lie it was built on. Helping the wrong woman hadn't destroyed my life. It had revealed the truth that saved it. The man I tried to protect from consequences never deserved my silence. And the woman I became after losing him, was the one he never saw coming. If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of yourself, your patience, your loyalty, your doubt, let me tell you something clearly. You are not foolish for loving deeply. You are dangerous the moment you stop betraying yourself. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story moved you, subscribe, leave a like, and share it with someone who might need it more than they realize. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge is living so fully that the past can no longer reach you.